Hey everyone, Nile here. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day so far. For this video, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. During 2019, I sort of just stopped making and uploading stuff on this channel. I was so caught up with some personal matters, so I didn't have the time or the drive to make videos. So when 2020 started, I told myself, okay, I'm going to get back in the saddle. There's so much stuff to look forward to, so I'm going to be cranking out videos like crazy. Nothing can stop me now. But then COVID hit, causing a total shutdown and the cancellation of Halloween Horror Nights. And just like that, my drive to make videos absolutely plummeted. I think I only uploaded like 3 or 4 videos in the span of 2 years, and it was mostly because of the whole pandemic. Thankfully, I got to cover my overall thoughts on the 2022 event, but then I realized I actually never talked about the event in 2021, the first post-COVID year. And there are actually a number of reasons as to why I never had a strong desire to share my thoughts via YouTube. The main one being that it just simply sucked ass.
Oh! Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
So for this video, I'm finally going to talk about the event in 2021. Now this video isn't going to be like a random, like standard normal review per se, but rather like a retrospective kind of thing. In 2021, I only went to Horror Nights 2 times. Yeah, that just goes to show how remarkable and unforgettable this event was. The first time I went, it was actually during team member preview. So I was one of the first people to see what the mazes were going to be like. And it was a really cool experience. Regardless of the whole event quality, which I will get to in a bit, I was just really happy to be there. You know, it was very exciting just seeing all the Horror Nights spookiness around me, like after 2 years of just being stuck at home doing nothing. So what is it about 2021 that makes me dislike it so much? What is it about that year's event that made it so terrible? Well, let's get into why. So I'm going to put you guys into my perspective when I attended team member preview, and we're going to go through all the attractions that I did in chronological order. First things first, opening ceremony. It felt very awkward. You know, usually in a typical ceremony, you'll have all the scare actors gathering around, getting hyped, getting ready to like quote unquote attack the guests and stuff. But in 2021, it was just like a scary voice guy saying a spiel, and then they proceed to like play audio and music and lines from like all the properties that were featured in that event that year. And then the fire towers start to erupt, and then the scare actors finally come, but they just like casually walk and then like just go up to the guests. Yeah, just again, it's like just very awkward. So after that, I made my way down to the lower lot and did my first maze, which was The Exorcist, which was located in Soundstage 29, like right across from Nintendo World. Regardless of the quality of this maze, like it felt so good just walking through a Horror Nights maze in general. Just after 2 years of nothing, like it felt so good seeing scare actors coming out of boo holes and seeing all the flashing lights and hearing all the scary noises and stuff. Like to me, like it felt like home. It felt so nice to walk through a Horror Nights maze again. With all that being said, this maze was so cheeks. It was cheeks, man. It was not good. First of all, I wasn't even all that excited to go through this one because I heard it was just going to be like a direct repeat, and I usually don't care very much for direct repeats because they end up being like very tedious and predictable and boring. And once you know it, this maze was no exception. It was very tedious, predictable, and boring. I just thought this was a total waste of maze space. Like you had a whole soundstage and you decided to do a repeat. And as much as I liked The Exorcist back in 2016, I'll admit it had a couple of issues, and you could have easily fixed those issues when bringing it back for 2021. But they decided to do it in the exact same layout, just to save some money, I guess. Just like, I don't know, man. I thought it was just very frustrating. Next up is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I will say is actually not that bad. Like it was actually a lot of fun. Now this maze was based solely on the first Texas Chainsaw movie. I did the Blood Brothers maze back in 2016, but that one was based on the sequel. This one is just like purely like a living recreation of that first film, and it was actually a lot of fun. The sets were pretty cool, the music was on point, and the scare actors were having a lot of fun here. However, I will say that it does kind of break the immersion for me whenever a scare actor is wearing a face mask or like they're banging like on a plexiglass window. I mean, I get it, like it's for the safety of the guests and the scare actors, but I don't know, it was just kind of like a wah-wah moment for me. But yeah, not much else I could say about Texas Chainsaw, you know, it was a lot of fun. So I made my way up to the upper lot, and the first thing I did over there was The Bride of Frankenstein Lives. This one was the one I was most excited for that year, and I was really hoping that the monster mazes would be 3 for 3, And wouldn't you know it, it did not disappoint. When I was walking through each maze back in 2021, I noticed they did something different with the scares. To me, it seemed as if they tried to refrain from doing the usual like, oh, scare actor comes out of a door and gets up close and personal with the guests kind of scare. So instead they went for more theatric scares, meaning you actually see the scare actors, act. But out of all the scares that do the theatrical scares the best, I would say Bride of Frankenstein does it the best. Some scenes felt like they were straight out of a stage play. Like for example, you'll have a vampire in one side of the room and then the bride at the other. You'll see the bride throw like a sharp wooden stake at the vampire and then turn towards the vampire, and then she acts like she got like the stake struck at her heart. To me, that's pure cinema. And of course, the set design was absolutely beautiful, the music was awesome, and the scare actors were amazing. And after I walked out of Bride of Frankenstein, I thought to myself, there is no way that the remaining mazes that I had to do are anywhere near the level of Bride of Frankenstein. Well, it turns out, not only was I right, but they're not up to par with the average Horror Nights maze. More on that a little bit later, but for now let's talk about Pandora's Box, which was the next maze that I did. This one was not that bad, it was pretty decent, it's a good time. I really enjoyed the Pandora's Box in 2019. I thought it was very scary, very intense, just very colorful. And this one was more or less the same as 2019. They even made a couple of changes here and there compared to the previous Pandora's Box maze. And I feel like if you're gonna bring back a beloved fan favorite maze, this is how you should approach it. Not like the Exorcist, where you change absolutely nothing about it. And look at even Not Scary Farm. They bring back a bunch of fan favorite mazes, but the thing is, every year they always try to change it up so it doesn't feel very stale. But yeah, once again, Pandora's Box is a good time. Not much else I can say about it. The Haunting of Hill House, however? Oof. How do I put this in the least harshest way possible? This is probably one of the most, if not the most, disappointing maze that I have ever walked through in all of my years of going to Horror Nights. I've only seen a couple of episodes of the show, but I've seen enough to know that this maze did not do the show justice. First thing I need to get off my chest, the bent neck lady.
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man? Get your ass on, boy.
I mean, I understand they didn't want the actors to have their neck bent for like 8 hours a night. I understand that. Like, I don't expect them to do that, but they could have done so much better. They could have done so many other things, but they decided to do whatever that was. But say they did do an okay job with the bent neck lady, the rest of the maze was just not good. It was just so boring. There were a lot of moments where I'm walking through a bunch of hallways with a bunch of doors and I'm expecting a scare actor to open one of the doors and pop out, but nothing happens. I walk through a bunch of hallways and nothing happens. And going back to Bride of Frankenstein, I mentioned that they did more of a theatrical approach when it came to the scares, and the theatricality actually worked well in that maze. They try to do the same approach in Hell House, but it doesn't work because it's literally just people walking. Supposedly it's just ghosts pacing back and forth in the same room. Wow, how very spooky. And it also didn't help that some of the characters wore face masks, like apparently ghosts aren't immune to COVID. I mean, no disrespect to any of the set designers who put this whole maze together, and no disrespect to any of the scare actors who performed in it. It's just, unfortunately for me, I thought the whole thing was just poorly executed. So as much as Hell House bummed me out, I was really hoping that Halloween 4, which was the last maze that I had left to do, would be a pleasant surprise, or like just halfway decent at least. And it turns out it was pretty good. While I was walking through it, like I could tell in some areas that this was meant to be something else, but it still didn't like take me out of the experience, it still wasn't bad. The scare actors for Michael Myers were in their A game, as always. The scares themselves are actually pretty interesting. A lot of them are just Michael Myers standing behind plexiglass and then triggering some kind of Pepper's ghost effect. But that stuff is kind of cool, I guess. Although I will say this, there is one big thing about this version of Halloween 4 that improves upon the original version back in 2018. And that's the involvement of the little girl in the movie, Jamie. In the first Halloween 4 maze, she was just like a under the bed puppet scare kind of thing, and that was it. Whereas in this one, she gets like her whole like tableau scene with like her like on the top of the staircase after like killing her like her foster mother, and Loomis just yelling at her like, no, like that's really cool. And I think I might actually prefer this version of Halloween 4 over the previous one solely for that scene alone. So yeah, Halloween 4 was a decent time. And I actually did the Walking Dead attraction. They closed it down like in 2020, but for some reason they didn't tear down the inside of the building, which I thought was very weird. I don't know, it was like Walking Dead being at HHN for one last time. Even though it was closed permanently for daytime guests, it was just like that final middle finger to HHN fans who just hate the Walking Dead at Horror Nights. But I mean, it's like whatever, I guess. They also brought back the Terror Tram after not having it in 2019, which was a really big surprise to me. But it was themed after the Forever Purge, and I only have one word to describe it. And last, but kinda sorta least, to be honest, scare zones. Scare zones in 2021 felt borderline non-existent. There were only 3 zones that year, and honestly each zone felt very empty. Like the amount of scare actors were like half of what they usually are, and it was kind of upsetting. The first scare zone that you encounter when you first walk in, which usually has like a lot of chainsaw people, they didn't even bother to give it a theme. Like I think it's literally called like Chainsaw Rangers or something like that. The second scare zone by the fire towers is, I don't even remember the name, man. Like I think it's called like Inferno City or something Inferno, Demon Inferno, I don't know, man. The only decent scare zone that year was probably Silver Screen Queens. I thought that was really cool, but then again, like every other scare zone in French Street, is just the same thing. It's usually tied to the maze that's right next to it, and then all the props that they have, if you want to call them props, are just dioramas of just skeletons in like themed costumes, and then just like more TV screens or projectors playing in the background. It's just the same thing. So while the scare actors are awesome, as always, the zones themselves are kind of doo-doo. Yeah, I think I talked about all there is to talk about. I talked about the 6 mazes, I talked about The Walking Dead, Terror Tram, and the 3 scare zones. Yeah, there's not much left to talk about. I said there's not much left to talk about. Yeah, that's what I thought. So, yeah, 2021 in a nutshell. It was pretty bad. But I did mention earlier that I went 2 nights. And the first night, again, was team member preview. So maybe there were some stuff missing. There were some effects that weren't working. There were some actors missing, you know. I just thought like, okay, maybe the second night will be much better, right? And turns out it was much worse. And not just because of the bad mazes. You might want to grab some snacks because I got a crazy story to tell you. So for the second night that I went to Horror Nights, I went around mid to late October, and I went with a group of friends. And before reaching the front gates, we decided to pregame a little bit. And we all took some quote-unquote special gummies to get us all quote-unquote excited. Yeah, that's all I'll say. The last time I pre-gamed with this same group, I only took 2 gummies, and it turns out it didn't hit me, like, at all. I didn't feel anything. So I thought, okay, this time I'm gonna take 5 gummies. Oh, it hit alright. It did take a while for it to hit, but I think it hit right when we reached the Krusty Land area. But at first, it felt weird, but a good kind of weird. I was vibing, I was giggling, I was chilling, I was having a good time. I thought, okay, I'm gonna have a great night tonight. So my friends and I went down the escalators to go to the lower loft. And it was around there where I started feeling very nervous. Not the good kind of usual Horror Nights nervous, but like a legit fear nervous. I was feeling a little anxious, but then I just thought to myself, you know what? Like, you could easily overcome it, you know, it's no big deal. So the first maze we were planning to do was the Exorcist. And we were walking on our way over there. And then that's when things started to go really crazy. As I was walking towards the entrance of the maze, I felt the floor get all squishy and doughy, and then I felt my legs get all wobbly and stuff. And as we got closer and closer to the entrance, I got more and more terrified. And it was at this moment that I thought to myself, you know what, maybe I'm not gonna have such a good time tonight. So I just told my friends like, hey, you know what, I'm feeling really scared, I'm feeling real panicky, I think I'm gonna sit this one out. And they were like, okay, that's fine, we'll meet you by the bathrooms by Jurassic World. When I first sat down, I thought to myself, oh my god, I feel so embarrassed. Now I'm ruining everyone's night because now they had to babysit me. But that feeling of embarrassment quickly turned into a feeling of absolute fear. Do you guys know how in the Jurassic World area they played the main theme song in the background with some like jungle noises in there as well? Well, during Horror Nights, they changed it up. So instead of having jungle noises and the main theme song, they had dinosaurs eating people alive. So you hear people screaming in agony, and you hear flesh being torn apart. And hearing all those noises while high was freaking me the hell out. I was so scared I had to shut my eyes throughout my entire trip. But out of the few times that I opened my eyes, I noticed something. I was sitting right across from the first aid office. and right in front of the first aid office were 2 security guards. And I thought to myself, oh my god, if these 2 security guards see me tripping balls, they're gonna come up to me and ask me questions, and then they're gonna know that I'm high. And if they know that I'm high, they're gonna kick me and my whole group out of the park, and I'm gonna ruin everyone's night. So I was trying my best to look like a normal functioning human being. It wasn't until an hour and a half later that I was comfortable enough to walk around and do a bunch of mazes. But at that point, I was just so physically and emotionally drained because of all the panic that I had to endure. So for the rest of the night, I wasn't even having a good time. I wasn't like my usual self while walking through Horror Nights mazes. I was just all depressed and tired. At least with Team Member Preview, I was still having a good time. Most of the mazes kind of sucked, but I was still my usual self and I was still enjoying all the Horror Nights vibes that I missed. But yeah, for the second night, after that bad trip, I was just very exhausted. And being exhausted while walking through poorly made mazes is not the vibe. And I know some of you guys are probably thinking like, oh, just cut them some slack. They just opened back up after COVID and they had to deal with like so many restrictions and guidelines that California had at the time, And at first I did cut them some slack, but then I attended Not Scary Farm for the very first time, and it just blew Horror Nights out of the water that year. So Universal, the much bigger company, literally had no excuse to put out such a subpar event, while Knott's had such a great event. With the mazes at Horror Nights, it felt like some pieces were missing. It didn't feel like a usual Halloween Horror Nights year. Horror Nights in 2021 in general just felt so strange. It just feels so out of place, especially when you compare them to all the previous events. What I'm about to say might sound like a hot take, but whatever, I'll go ahead and say it anyway. I feel like Universal should have waited until 2022 to officially bring back Halloween Horror Nights. I would have rather gladly waited another year for Universal to get their stuff together and give us a proper Halloween Horror Nights again, as opposed to what we got in 2021, where they feel like their budget just got cut in half and they had so many things going against it with all the COVID guidelines and restrictions, so it couldn't even reach its full potential. But yeah, 2021 was just a big letdown, and it will easily go down as my least favorite year of Halloween Horror Nights out of all the ones that I've attended. But what do you all think? Do you agree with me and think that 2021 was just a bad year overall? Or do you actually disagree with me and think it's not as bad as everyone makes it out to be and they actually did the best that they could with what they had? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'm always open for healthy discussions. If you stuck around to the very end, thank you so much for watching. And until then, see you all in the fog.